Now, one person we did hear from today for the first time, Karen Reed herself, doubling down, of course, saying she did not do this. She wants to know who did.
Said it feels we're the only ones fighting for the truth of what happened to John O'Keefe. And me and my family and my attorneys and my team have marshaled every resource to get to the truth. It just feels like no one else wants it.
Karen, just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do.
And no, she didn't do it. No, she didn't do it. This is an innocent woman. She didn't do it.
I tried to save his life.
Yeah.
I tried to save his life at 6 in the morning. I was covered in the only one trying to save his life.
Why'd you admit to it?
She didn't admit to it. She didn't admit to anything close to that. Nothing close to that. And you should know that.
That was like 3 or 4 times she admitted to it.
No, she didn't.
That's not true.
She asked a question. She asked a question, which is very different. She didn't admit to anything.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
All right. How is everybody? Really feels good to be back. Had a little break from the city, finally back. Feel ready to talk about Karen Reed today and some of the evidence that you didn't see. Now, when we talk about evidence, people like to think about physical evidence or forensic evidence, but testimony is evidence. And one of the most overlooked characters in the Karen Reed case are John O'Keefe's niece and nephew, Patrick and Kaylee. They never get talked about. And they told some very telling things about the relationship between John O'Keefe and Karen Reed right before Karen Reed took her car 24 miles an hour in reverse, her foot 75% down on the pedal, and clipped him and left him to expire in the cold. I hate to use these euphemisms, but that's what she did, cruelly and calculatedly. I believe it's something that she was fantasizing about, thought about. I don't believe this was a spur of the moment thing. That's my opinion. So, right before this all happened, they were fighting a lot. This is all... pull it up. Let me just hold on one second, guys. All right, yes. Just want to make sure I'm pulling up the right thing. Pulling up the right thing. They were fighting often, and here, I mean, you can listen to their testimony here. They were fighting about the only fight we really hear about is the fight about the Dunkin' Donuts, and you're feeding them, Karen, you're feeding them crap. And it sounds so forgivable. Like, who didn't want to treat the kids? But we know from also Karen Reed's text messages to John O'Keefe on that night that she felt that the kids, meaning Kaylee and Patrick, made the four of them were toxic together. So Karen Reed says, it's not me who's toxic. It's the addition of these children that are toxic. She never wanted children. She resented caring for them. They were, my opinion, I feel that she thought they were good for her image in the beginning. She got a little of the shine of it, but the day-to-day taking care of them, she wasn't up for. So on February, this is the link is in the description of this episode. On February 22nd, both the victim's 10-year-old nephew, CF, and the 14-year-old niece, KF, were interviewed at the Norfolk Advocates for Children's Center in Foxborough, MA. The children indicated they had lived with their uncle, the victim, for approximately 8 years following the passing of both of their parents. Both children indicated that the victim and the defendant, that's Karen Reed, meaning John O'Keefe and Karen Reed, had started dating approximately 2 years ago after having dated sometime in the distant past. We never hear about that, right? We only hear that they knew each other, etc. They both indicated that the defendant would stay over. So Karen, I'm going to try to replace the word Karen Reed with the defendant. They both indicated that Karen Reed would stay over their house on Meadows Avenue several nights a week. PF, so that's Patrick, stated that the defendant and the victim argued a decent amount of time. PF, did I read that as HF? I'm sorry. Oh, I think that's a typo. Okay, PF stated that the defendant and the victim argued a decent amount of time. PF recalled a recent argument over groceries and the victim expressing needing a break. So John O'Keefe expressing that he needed a break from Karen Reed. After that particular argument, John O'Keefe wanted Karen Reed to leave their house. However, she refused. Patrick indicated that he had left the home on January 28th at approximately 6 p.m. for a sleepover at a friend's house and was not present at the home overnight. He indicated that neither he nor his sister had access to the ring system, but believed that Karen Reed did from the family computer within the house. Here's Kaylee's evidence. Kaylee indicated during her interview that the defendant and the victim, so Karen Reed and John O'Keefe, had argued a lot toward the end, approximately 2 to 3 times a week. She further stated that approximately a week prior to January 29th, she was sitting on the stairway inside the house while John O'Keefe and Karen Reed were arguing. Kaylee stated that she heard John O'Keefe tell Karen Reed that their relationship had run its course and that it isn't healthy. She stated that Karen Reed did not want the relationship to end. For those in the back, Kaylee stated that Karen Reed, known in this document as the defendant, did not want the relationship to end and refused to leave the house. Kaylee stated that she had gone to bed at approximately 11 p.m. on January 28th after her friend had left and was awoken by the defendant at approximately 4:30 a.m. and the defendant screaming and acting frantic. And the key word is acting, in my opinion, frantic. She put on her feigned hysteria. and she picked out her marks. Kaylee was going to be a mark. Jen McCabe was going to be a mark, and Carrie Roberts was going to be her marks. And she was going to do her bidding through them. So she wasn't going to dial these people. She didn't have to dial 911. They all did it for her. So she could do this kind of, they did the calling. They did the looking. It's their evidence. And I think she also picked people that would be not so convincing to a jury or not so likable to a jury. I think Karen Reed is extremely calculating person. So I thought we'd look at Carrie Roberts' evidence. I know people on this side of the fence have said it's so great. It wasn't even cross-examined. I'm not so sure how strong it was. My opinion at the time was that it didn't leave a huge impression. I thought that she was perhaps, I don't know. We'll listen to it together. Let's listen to it together. Also, I have your comments, some interesting comments. We'll get to it all in this episode. Here's Carrie Roberts' testimony. Let's take a look.
All right, Mr. Lally. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Carrie Roberts, Roberts.
And where do you live, ma'am?
Canton, Mass.
And how long have you lived in Canton, Mass?
10 years.
And who, if anyone, do you live in Canton with?
My husband, my 2 children.
And your 2 children, how old are they? And boy, girl?
My son is 12, my daughter's 14.
And do you work, ma'am?
I do.
What do you do for work?
I'm an executive assistant.
How long have you been doing that?
17 years.
And your husband, Kurt, does he work as well?
Yes.
What does he do for work?
He's a heavy equipment operator.
And how long has he been doing that?
Maybe 20 plus years.
Now, if I could turn your attention to the evening of January 28th, 2022 into the morning of the 29th. Do you recall those dates? Yes. And do you recall what days of the week they were?
Say it again.
Do you recall what days of the week they were?
Friday.
So the 28th.
Friday the 28th.
Into a
Saturday the 29th.
Now, on the evening of the 28th, do you recall what you were doing that evening?
I was bowling with my daughter and her friends and one of the mothers.
And do you recall where that was?
Westgate Lanes in Brockton.
And about what time was it that you got home from that?
Probably about 8:30ish because there was a storm coming, so we wanted to be home. I didn't want to be out late.
And when you got home, you and your daughter, is that correct?
Say that one more time?
You and your daughter came home around 8:30 or so?
Yes.
Who, if anyone else from your house, was home when you got there?
I think my husband was home. He was going out. I think I passed him, and he was heading out to meet his friends. My son was not home.
And who were the friends that he was going out to meet?
John O'Keefe and Michael Camerano.
So, Ms. Roberts, I'd like to start with just Mr. Camerano. How do you know him?
He's been childhood friends with my husband.
And do you know where your husband was going to meet Mr. Camerano and Mr. O'Keefe?
Miss McCarthy's. It's a bar in Canton.
Sort of in the center of town, is that right?
Yes.
And Mr. O'Keefe, how do you know him?
I've known him since high school.
And where did you go to high school?
Braintree High School.
And how is it that you came to know Mr. O'Keefe? How would you describe your relationship with Mr. O'Keefe?
He was one of my closest friends.
In addition to John O'Keefe, through growing up and going to Braintree High, were you familiar with any other members of the O'Keefe family?
Yes, Kristen, his sister, was a senior when I was a freshman. John was a year older than me, and Paul was 2 years younger than me. So at some point, I was in school with all of them.
after high school, at some point, did you come to know any of the members of the O'Keefe family while you were living in Canton?
Yes, my son and John's nephew went to an in-home daycare together. So I went to go pick up my son at one point, and Kristen was there, and we figured out that we lived in the same neighborhood that we were going to be moving into. And then Kristen got sick.
And during that time, sort of when you first reconnected with Kristen, about how old was your son and her son?
My son was 18 months. Patrick was, he's almost a year older.
And your son and Patrick Furbush, did they end up going to the same school in Canton?
Yes, they went to home daycare. They went to preschool, pre-K. And by the time they got to elementary school, they got separated because they were troublemakers.
But did they go to the same school all throughout?
Yes.
And what, if any, other activities did your son do along with Kristen's son, Patrick?
Well, Patrick wanted to try hockey, so they did hockey together, and then he didn't like that.
There's also other things that Kaylee and Patrick have said. Here's Kaylee. Kaylee indicated during her interview that the defendant and the victim had argued a lot towards the end. Okay, I'd read that. She stated she heard the victim. Okay. At relevant times, Kaylee heard the defendant say, JJ never came home. Maybe I did something. Maybe a snowplow hit him. Maybe I hit him. Maybe I hit him. We were in an argument. There is something that's gotten out of the timeline. This argument, maybe he got hit by a snowplow, and we know that her defense team were originally going that direction. Gonna go blame it. I think that was her first thought, was to blame it on a plow before she thought of the fantastical beat up defense. When Karen Reed went to John O'Keefe's house to pick some things up after O'Keefe's body had been discovered, John's niece testified that Karen had said she was living a nightmare. John O'Keefe's nephew stated that the defendant and the victim argued a decent amount of time. He also indicated that they argued a lot towards the end. And during Karen Reed's first trial, John's nephew testified that Karen Reed would get mad at them for little things and stay mad for days. One time we got takeout food, and I was taking a little while to eat it, and the defendant, that's Karen Reed, thought I didn't appreciate it, so she got mad at me, the boy said on the stand, according to the court transcript. He said Reed was angry. When Reed was angry, she would give him the silent treatment or leave a room whenever he walked in. O'Keefe's niece, now 16, testified, or she was 16 when she testified in the first trial, that Reed would drag the children into arguments with O'Keefe, which were increasingly frequent in the weeks before his death. On a vacation in Aruba a few weeks before O'Keefe died, the couple got into a yelling argument because Reed accused him of kissing somebody else. When O'Keefe tried to end their relationship shortly before his death, Reed refused, the girl testified, ignoring his request for her to leave the family's home. And where did she go after she hit John O'Keefe? She went right to his home. Wasn't supposed to stay in Canton last night, but I did. I went into John O'Keefe's house like a burglar. Schemed till about 4:30 in the morning. Hey, Manny. You, Roberta, what are your thoughts on law tubers who cover this? I wanted to watch how they are covering it now, but they have such a bias, a strong bias for Karen Reed. Well, that's where the money is. no matter the evidence, and I avoid trying. Well, yeah, I think that this is how you get the views and the clicks and the views and the super chats is by telling the fantastical story. We all know that the money side is on any of these innocence frauds campaigns. It's not just Karen Reed. Who made money on making a murderer? The filmmakers, the YouTubers who took Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey's side. West Memphis 3 similarly. It's a fantastical story, and people seem to love these innocence fraud tales. It beats right guy was accused, right woman was accused, right woman gets convicted. And I think that I think they exploit the times where there has been corruption in our justice system. But they're corrupting it the most. Is the wrongful conviction movement is the most corrupting of our legal system, ironically. It's just a huge injustice, and it goes on and on and on. It's a money machine. Who's making money from these books? It's the books, it's the documentaries. So it's two sides. It's pushing an ideology forward that changes our laws. We seem to be on, and it seems to be a pattern that our legal system goes through, where in America, at least, where we go, oh, we're incarcerating people so greatly. Never mind that our system is so violent. And then America goes to pot. We start letting people out and not prosecuting people, which is what we saw. And we still have, in New York, we still have Alvin Bragg. These open society backed or Soros backed DAs. Don't make me play the clip again. It just happens to be true. I know people react badly when you say Soros backed DAs, but it's open society, which is Soros's foundation money that was put into running all these very, very far left former defense attorneys as district attorneys so that they would not do the job of the district attorney. So we'd have two defense attorneys talking to each other in court and no real district attorney. Seems like Baltimore's the same way. I just heard Adnan Syed, same thing. Who got rich on Adnan Syed? That whole fraud. Serial and everyone, Rabia Chaudhry bought a new house with that money, wrote a book.
And they played baseball together since they were T-ball, like 4 or 5.
Now, you mentioned that Kristen O'Keefe or Kristen Furbush at that point, at some point after you had met her, she got sick. Is that right?
Correct.
Eventually, she passed away. Is that right?
Correct.
And after she passed away, her husband also passed away.
Correct.
And at some point after that, what, if any, role did John O'Keefe have with reference to his case?
Well, when Kristen passed away, I was in touch with John, just seeing if they needed help with the kids, getting them to and from wherever, because I was down the street. Kristen passed away, and then he said, I might move in. Steve's got to figure out finances, but I might move into your neighborhood. And I said, oh, okay. And then when Steve died, John did move in, and he took over raising the kids.
And fair to say that you were, with reference to your son being friends with his nephew Patrick, you would see him fairly often, and by him I mean John O'Keefe.
Oh yes, daily. Mm-hmm.
And what, if any, at some point did John and his niece and nephew move from down the street from your house?
Yes, they moved across town. So I live on the Milton side. He moved over sort of near the Stoughton side.
About how far a drive is that, sort of from your house to where you moved to? It was on Meadows, correct? Yes,
it depends because Canton's terrible for traffic. Maybe 7 minutes, maybe 8, depending. And if it's in the evening, it's longer.
And after Mr. O'Keefe and his niece and his nephew moved sort of across town, where did his nephew Patrick, where did he go to school at?
He remained at the same school that he was at with my son. So on Wednesdays, when John couldn't grab him in time because he'd be working in the city, Patrick would come home with me.
You familiar with what Mr. O'Keefe did for a living?
He was a Boston police officer, but at the time he was working in an office registering sex offenders.
And so you would help out as far as picking up his son. What, if any, assistance did you have with regard to his niece Kaylee as well?
Say that one more time.
What, if any, assistance did you have with regard to Mr. O'Keefe and his schedule with regard to his niece Kaylee as well?
I didn't take care of Kaylee as much. That was sort of, there was other women, Jen McCabe, one of them. She sort of really took hold of caring for Kaylee because her daughter was friends with Kaylee, and I sort of got Patrick. So,
Miss Riley, you have to keep your voice up. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry.
Isn't it interesting that Karen went and collected the two friends that were connected to the children that she deeply resented? Isn't that interesting? Anyone else find that interesting?
If you could keep your voice up too, okay?
My apologies. And then
A little more of Judge Cannoni's rude treatment of Adam Lally. I just can't believe she treated him like that in front of the jury. I just can't. I don't think she will. She seems to have much more regard for Hank Brennan, and I don't think we're going to see that kind of treatment. But, you know, he was one guy who had to talk all day long. He didn't get to split his talking with another lawyer. And, I mean, just can you keep your voice up? I mean, it got really rude at times. That was a little gentler.
through the years that you knew Mr. O'Keefe when he lived in Canton and your time being friends with him, what, if any, conversations would you have with Mr. O'Keefe in regard to any sort of relationships or dating or anything like that?
Well, he dated a lot of people. So it depends.
Your conversations with what, if any, sort of role would you have, or what if any, knowledge did you have in reference to the people that he dated?
My husband, whenever he would go on a date with somebody, he would have my husband come meet them, sort of say, like, what do you think? And he had a couple of girlfriends that were very nice.
Now, at some point, did you become aware of a person by the name of Karen?
So he had a couple of girlfriends who were very nice. Karen Reed doesn't sound like she's one of them. So if you're just tuning in, we're listening to the testimony of Carrie Roberts, who was a friend of John O'Keefe, the victim in this case. Carrie Roberts was phoned via, and the way Karen Reed does everything, by proxy. The whole crime is by proxy, using her car to hit John O'Keefe. She collected Jen McCabe, who was connected to Kaylee, John O'Keefe's niece, who he was one of the prime carer for. And of course, here's Carrie Roberts. She's connected to Patrick, John O'Keefe's nephew. So my point was that, isn't it interesting that Karen Reed, who deeply resented John O'Keefe's niece and nephew, said the four of them were toxic, meaning the kids made it toxic. We're not toxic together. Meaning Karen saying, John, you and I aren't toxic together. But once you add the kids, it's all toxic. It's just toxic. The kids make it toxic. She deeply resented those kids. She hated those kids. She wanted to go back and talk to the kids, but after John O'Keefe passed the hospital, or was declared dead in the hospital, but she didn't. She barely said two words to them. She mostly was interested, in my opinion, what she did was take the damning evidence of her showing the Ring camera footage showing the ring camera. She edited the ring camera footage of her showing Carrie Roberts and Jen McCabe her tail light out of the ring camera off of the computer, and collected her the small amount of stuff that she had. After 2 years of living there, she walked out with a small bag of stuff. So I was thinking, after 2 years of living with my boyfriend, it would have been a whole day of getting stuff. Basically lived here. So, I mean, we'll tell you, things were not great. They weren't going to get married, and John O'Keefe had had enough. This was when I think what is not talked about is that they were really it was over. It was over between the two of them. And Karen Reed, if you read her text messages, she's pushing John O'Keefe all day to say it's over. He's not into it. Just say you're not into it. He's, I think, giving her one more chance. Can't quite do it. Then they argue that night, I believe, about the plumber, quote unquote, that she had over at 7:30 at night at her place that was going to come back tomorrow, mañana. In the middle of a blizzard, he wanted to come back. I mean, people could, in a nor'easter, never mind that. Never mind a blizzard, a nor'easter. Never mind that nobody was coming back that day. People could barely drive. It just seemed all made up to make John O'Keefe jealous. Because John O'Keefe's father was a plumber, and he would have gladly fixed it for free, whatever her plumbing issues or hot water issues were that night that were delaying her from meeting John O'Keefe and company in the bar that night. So I think they fought about that. They fought, and they could have also fought about her not really, about her not wanting to hang out with his friends. That could have been another option. I tend to think it's the plumber. He told her it was over and she hit him. That's my theory on it. Not often talked about. The general theory you hear about is the Gretchen Voss theory, right? The Gretchen Voss, she was so drunk. I don't think alcohol hit the sides. I think she was a habitual drinker. Hey, Manny says, the case is also influenced, you mentioned in the post, how the community dislikes the cops. Yeah, this is an anti-cop case. And some people, mostly women, identify with Karen Reed being scorned in the past. I'm not sure that's true. She said she's their OJ. You said she's their OJ. I'm not sure people, I think some people on both sides of this case make excuses and say she was so drunk. I was pointing out Kate from Masshole Troll Mafia's Twitter post that who hasn't gotten in an argument with their boyfriend or drank too much. Really? Has your boyfriend ended up dead after the argument? That's my question. How many people have had that happen? How many people are defendants in a murder case? Not often. So I think she's, wrongfully relatable. I've never seen you drunk yet. Wait, you've never seen me drunk? Boyfriend says he's never seen me drunk.
Yes.
And when was it and how was it that you first came to know that person?
Maybe.
John called me and said, Karen and I are going to stop by because we had people over. And I said, who is Karen? Because I didn't know if he was going to bring someone from high school and surprise me with a random, I had never heard of her. And he said, you know who Karen is? The girl I'm dating. And I said, nope, but okay. And then they came over that night.
And do you recall when about that was?
I think it was sometime in July.
In July of what year?
What are we, 2020? 2020?
So sometime shortly after sort of the COVID pandemic?
Yes.
how would you describe your relationship, if any, with Karen Reed?
She was like another person that took care of the kids. She took care of Kaylee and Patrick a lot, so I would coordinate with her if Ryan and Patrick were going to go to the golfing range, or if Ryan was going to go with them to the Red Sox game, that kind of thing. We weren't do lunch or hang out like girlfriends.
Was there any occasions where you had sort of socialization or go out as couples or anything like that with Mr. O'Keefe?
No, they came over our house one time, and then we'd do baseball tournaments down the Cape, and we'd all get together, but the four of us never went out.
And just for clarity purposes, do you see Ms. Reed in the courtroom today?
Yep.
Identify her as to where she's seated or an article of clothing she's wearing?
Say that again?
Could you identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing?
She is seated at that front table, and she has a black and white suit jacket.
Can I just ask the record reflect identification presented by the witness?
Yes.
Now, coming back to that evening of the 28th, your husband went out to meet Mr. Camerano and Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Yes.
And do you know about what time it was that your husband Kurt arrived home that night?
Maybe around 10:30.
And after he arrived home, what, if anything, specifically do you recall the two of you doing or anything before going off?
Marina Prattle, thanks so much. Do you think, and thanks so much, hey Manny, do you think more people now believe she is guilty than innocent now that everything Turtle Boy sold them has been debunked? No, I think that there have been problems, but they haven't had anything to do with evidence. It's so much of this is just a belief. So when it doesn't, and it's blowing up the minutia, so that when they'll say well, we're going to go over the ARCA testimony sometime soon. That ridiculous ARCA testimony. They'll point to the ARCA testimony or butt dials, and whether they were butt dials or were they real calls that they don't want to talk about for innocent reasons. Those giving evidence, because Karen Reed has led such a feral campaign that they're scared of something being exposed. I don't know, but I think all innocence fraud campaigns do is blow up the minutia, things that are really unimportant, and downplay the really important evidence, like Karen Reed's own statements, her car data that we know about now, that she hit something 24 miles an hour in reverse with her foot 75% on the pedal, never once touching the brake, with her infotainment system, let's not forget that, beeping at her, flashing at her really loudly. It's akin to a fire alarm. Now Karen Reed is saying in her interviews that she had U2, the band. God, I hate U2. Sorry, I know they're popular, but boy, do I dislike that band. Blasting from her stereo. Why has she embellished her story? Because she has to think of some reason why she ignored the camera in her infotainment system that was connected to her reversing, saying, flashing, warning her, akin to someone in her ear yelling, "You're going to hit something. You're going to hit something, Karen. You're going to hit something, Karen. Closer, closer, louder, louder." How could she ignore that? Now it said she had the music blaring. Oh, let me not forget the howling wind. The howling wind was so loud with her music playing that she didn't hear or see her flashing infotainment system. Give me a break, Karen Reed. It is ridiculous, unbelievable, not credible. And I think a fair jury will find it the same way. I thought the state proved or the Commonwealth, whatever you want to call it, proved their case the first time. If we hadn't had turtle riders on the jury, that's my feeling, she would have been convicted. I think Hank Brennan, I think it's interesting to see the silence of the Karen Reed supporters when it comes to Hank Brennan. They're looking for a weakness to exploit. And they haven't found one yet. I think the closest thing that they've come to is calling him like a sleazy lawyer, basically. Trying to trick Marie Russell, the dog bite expert, into answering incorrectly. We have that to look forward to in the beginning of January. Boy, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be like a second Christmas for me. So I don't know what the majority thinks. I think that where there's been trouble, Rena, is with the Karen Reed supporters. Always has to do with ego. They weren't invited to Karen Reed's party, which shows you quite a deal of narcissism, right? I wasn't invited to the party and I'm on the ground every day. Only the YouTubers and the people who were bringing in the big money were invited. Rena, thanks. Rena Prattle says again, I don't think ARCA will be allowed in this time without redoing it all, without redoing all the without redoing it all the information. Bev won't allow it, my opinion. That's interesting, because they certainly looked at a very limited amount of data, the ARCA people. But the Karen readers just hang on to that and ignore every other witness. I mean, it took the Commonwealth weeks. I mean, we had weeks of evidence. And I think they also ignore any spoken evidence, which is so important in a trial. Anything said under oath. They just look at sort of the physical data. I think both sides, even people on this side, do the same thing. They don't want to talk about testimony as evidence.
I remember sitting on the couch and the front door is right there and it was open and it started to snow. It had just started to come down probably about midnight, but it was coming down fast. So you knew it was little snowflakes usually mean a big snowstorm. And I said, well, it's starting. So we went to bed because we knew we weren't going out anywhere.
And as far as turning your attention to the next morning, at some point you awoke. Do you recall what it was that awoke you that morning on the 29th?
Karen called me at 5 o'clock in the morning.
And is that sort of a normal occurrence as far as Ms. Reed calling you and specifically calling you that early?
No.
And when you went to answer the phone, at some point did you look at sort of like the screen to your phone?
I don't know. I just answered it.
This in a different way. As far as at some point, did you realize or did you know whether or not that call that at some point you answered, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the call that you answered, do you know whether or not that was the first call that Ms. Reed had placed you that morning or no?
It was the second call, only from looking at my phone after, because I said, oh, shoot, she called me. She just called and I didn't. She called twice.
And the phone call that you answered, about what time was that?
5 on the dot.
And if you know from looking at your phone, the phone call that you didn't wake up or didn't answer, do you know how long before that phone call was?
I think it was a minute or two before.
So 5 o'clock on the dot, you get a phone call, you answer it, and it's Ms. Reed, is that right?
Correct.
And that phone number, you had her sort of programmed into your phone as a contact, is that correct?
Yes.
And on prior occasions, had you called that number or gotten a call from that number on prior occasions?
Yes.
And when you got that call or made that call, who was the other person on the end that you were speaking?
Say that again?
Maybe a pretty simple question as far as it goes, but just with reference to any prior phone calls that you either got or received with that number that you programmed in as Karen Reed. When you spoke to someone by calling or receiving a call from that contact, who was on the other end of the call?
Karen Reed.
Thank you. So you answered the phone sometime right around 5 a.m. and
So, and right around this time, Karen Reed's also calling Catherine Camerano, John O'Keefe's friend, but she decided not to gather her up. She instead chose Carrie Roberts. Why? She calls Carrie first, then she calls Catherine Camerano. So I'm trying to figure out who she calls first. This all happened so fast. Jennifer McCabe said she was not sure if she called John O'Keefe's niece, Kaylee, back or if Kaylee called Jennifer back. The time of this call is not known to the public, but Catherine Camerano heard Jen McCabe in the background when she called Karen back. Jennifer McCabe said when she spoke to Karen for the second time, she told Karen that she and her husband Matthew had seen her and John in her black SUV outside her sister's house at 34 Fairview. Karen said to Jennifer that she didn't remember going there, and then she started yelling, "Jen, Jen." And then she was saying, "Did I hit him? Could I have hit him?" Just interesting that my question is, why was Catherine Camerano not taken to 34 Fairview, or did she not, was she supposed to? Did she not bite? Why were Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts chosen? Let me know what you think in the comments.
Can you describe to the jury sort of what the content of that conversation was?
I answered the phone and she said, "John's dead. Carrie, Carrie, Carrie." And then she hung up.
And as far as her end of the conversation, did you say anything or get a chance to say anything before she hung up?
No.
And when she's speaking to you and saying those words to you over the phone, how loudly is she saying those words?
Very loud. She woke my husband, who was sleeping.
By the time that the phone rings and you pick it up, your husband's sleeping, correct?
Yes.
And then afterwards, he's awake.
Correct.
Now, what happened then?
Then I got out of bed and Kurt said, "What was that?" I said, I don't know. Something's happening." And I think I started getting dressed at that point because I don't know if I started getting dressed at that point or after she called back again. I tried to call her, I think a couple times back to be like, what is going on? Finally, she called me back again and she said, "I'm afraid John might be dead. He might have gotten hit by a plow. He did not come home last night. I was not supposed to stay in Canton last night and he would never leave Kaylee alone. I think something happened."
I wasn't supposed to stay in Canton last night. But John O'Keefe said in those text messages, "Stay with me this weekend and we'll worry about your hot water issue after the nor'easter passes. No one's going anywhere." She wasn't supposed to stay in Canton alone without John. That's what she means. But she was happy to sneak into his house. Often little talked about part of this story.
And do you recall earlier in the day of the 28th having any communication with either Mr. O'Keefe or Ms. Reed?
I did with John. He texted me.
Do you recall generally what that was about?
My son got into a scuffle with some boy at school, and Patrick wasn't in school at the time. I think he went to a doctor's appointment, but Patrick got wind of it, so John was calling to see if my son was okay.
Now, turning back to, again, that morning on the 29th, you called Ms. Reed a couple times. She didn't answer. Is that correct?
Correct.
And at some point, she called you back?
Correct.
And about how long was it after that initial phone call that you had where she hung up? How much time had elapsed between that call and the next one?
I don't know, maybe 5 minutes.
And so when she calls back, she makes those statements to you that you just testified about, and upon her making those statements, what, if anything, was your response?
I said, then she said she checked Kaylee's phone to see if John had called. And I said, okay, where are you now? And she said, I'm driving. Can I come to your house? Will you drive my car? I don't remember anything from last night. We drank so much, I don't remember anything. And I said, you need to go home and be with Kaylee. If she's there by herself, I'll go look for him or something of that nature. Because I said, you're going to get a DUI. If you were drinking all night last night and you don't remember anything, you shouldn't be driving.
All right, so next question, please.
When you were talking to her on the phone, what, if any, observations did you make?
See, do you think that's something that she added? You're going to get a DUI, or do you think that's something she thought? You know, it's very hard with memories. Is it something she thought, like, oh, you're going to get a DUI driving, or, you know, is that something she added for the jury? But there's an interesting part of the timeline where at 5:07, where she calls Carrie. We'll get to that. We'll get to that part.
How she was speaking, or
She was very frantic, and her voice was elevated. She was very frantic.
and the loudness that you were describing during the course of that first phone call, what, if any, observations you made with respect to that in regard to the second?
Same. Throughout the rest of the day, it was the same.
So you indicate to her that she needs to go home, is that right?
Correct.
And what, if anything, did she say in response to that?
She said, I'm going to come to your house. Will you drive my car? And I said, okay.
And after that, what did you do from there?
I started getting dressed. I think that's when I was starting getting dressed. And my husband said, where are you going? I said, I don't know. Something happened. John didn't come home. Karen's worried, so I'm going to go help her. And he said, you're not going anywhere. It's a blizzard. And I said, yes, I am. And I went downstairs. I started the car, cleared it off, and I sat there waiting, and she didn't come. So I called.
During the time that you're waiting in the car, do you know about how long period it was that you were waiting in the car?
I would say at least 10 minutes of sitting in the car.
And to that point, as far as when you went outside to the car, what, if anything, did you observe about the weather, and what, if anything, did you do with your car as you were turning it on?
I cleaned the car off. I turned the car on. I got in it, and I thought to myself, well, she thinks he might have got hit by a plow or something. I'll see if there's any accidents. So I called the Canton non-emergency line, and I said, have there been any plow accidents? My friend's boyfriend didn't come home. And they said no, there were no accidents. So then I called Good Samaritan Hospital in Milton to see if anybody had been brought in a car accident. They said no. And then finally Karen called back.
Before we get to that, just in reference to, at any point in time, did you call Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And when you called Mr. O'Keefe, were you able to speak to Mr. O'Keefe?
No.
Do you know how many times you called Mr. O'Keefe?
My husband called him, and I think I called him.
And when was that in relation to you going up to your car and clearing it?
That was when I was in the house. Karen actually said, can you try and call him?
And you did, and you didn't get an answer?
Correct.
And do you know whether or not your husband got an answer?
He did not.
So you go out to the car, you're waiting, and you make the phone call initially to Canton Police, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you know who you spoke to at Canton Police?
I believe it was Officer Good.
Is that someone that you knew in any way prior to this date of January 29th?
We have mutual friends, but no, I'd never met him.
Now, you call the hospitals, and then at some point after you finish speaking to the hospitals, the defendant then calls you back, correct?
Yes.
And what, if anything, can you describe to the jury sort of what was the content of that conversation that third time?
She said, I said, where are you? I'm in the car. And she said, I'm at Jen's house. And I said, Jen who? She said, Jen McCabe. She's going to drive my car. And I said, okay, stay there. I'll come to there. We'll follow and we'll drop your car off. We'll just take my car and go look for him.
Right. She found a... How did she pick Jen McCabe as her mark? Why Carrie? Why Jen McCabe?
And I drove to Jen's, and I pulled in the driveway behind them. I was still on speakerphone. Jen is driving. Karen's in the passenger seat, and we drove. I said, do you remember, did you look through the house? Could he be passed out somewhere in the house? She said, I don't know. I didn't look. So I said, let's do that. Let's get in the cars. We're not taking 2 cars. It's a blizzard. We're going.
That's very telling. She didn't look through the house to make sure he could come home. If she was confused as to where he was, and you look in the most obvious place, make sure he's not home. Maybe he fell asleep on the sofa in an unusual place. Maybe he drank too much and fell asleep somewhere odd. Wouldn't you think that? If you didn't know what happened, but of course she did know what happened, John O'Keefe. She knew she wasn't missing. She knew right where she clipped him, right where he was. Psychic Karen Reed, suddenly no one else saw him in the snow but Karen Reed. When Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts approach, she's kicking the car door. Let me out, let me out. That's him, that's him, that's him. She sees John O'Keefe before anyone else does in the snow. No one else sees anything. But Psychic Karen Reed knows right where to collect him. And we'll find out. She was driving in this 2 mile an hour mile radius looking for him if she actually went to 34 Fairview before Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts collected her, went home from 34 from Meadows, from John O'Keefe's house. So it would look awfully bad to just be standing right next to him. Meet me at 34 Fairview. There's her car with a smashed out taillight. She's already made her own evidence at 5:07 with the love tap into John O'Keefe's car as to an excuse as to how she damaged her taillight on her car. Look awfully funny. So isn't this interesting? It goes right to a plan that everyone's thinking of, a plan that strangely benefits Karen Reed.
I'm going to go back to Meadows, and we're going to go look in the house first. He could be passed out behind the couch or on the floor, or who knows. So we went to the house.
Yeah, I'm sorry, before you get into that, just as far as directionality and where you're going at this initial stage, you're sort of directing what's going to happen and where you're going to go, correct?
Correct.
Now, you had mentioned that the defendant said she was at Jen's house. You asked Jen who, and she said Jennifer McCabe, correct?
Object.
I'll allow it.
With regards to Ms. McCabe, did you know her, or how did you know her prior to this morning of January 29th?
I had met her once when John took her and I to Reebok because he's got a 50% discount, so we would go periodically and get the kids' shoes. So she, John, and myself went to Reebok, got shoes, and then we went to the Hillside for lunch. That was it. I wasn't friends with her.
Is that someone that you had programmed in your phone as a contact? Did you have her information prior to January 29th?
No.
And when you went to Ms. McCabe's house that morning, how was it that you knew where Ms. McCabe's house was at that point?
I've picked up Kaylee there a time or two for John and brought her home if I was heading that way, because Jen's house is on the way to John's.
And So you go to Ms. McCabe's house, and can you describe for the jury sort of what you observe or what you see when you're first coming up to Ms. McCabe?
I pulled in the driveway behind Karen's car, and Karen and Jen are in the car talking. I'm still on Bluetooth so I can hear them. And Karen said that she remembered leaving him at Waterfall. And Jen said, no, I saw you pull up to my sister's house. And then at some point in the conversation, she said, what about my taillight? What about my taillight? And I looked, and there was a piece missing, but it was caked on with snow. You could tell there was a little black hole, but there was snow like caked on it, and it was a blizzard at this point.
Now, just as far as over the course of this early morning when you're making that drive from your house to Ms. McCabe's house, correct?
Yes.
So during that time, can you describe sort of what the lighting conditions were, what the roadway conditions were, what you observed as you were driving over there?
It was not light out yet, and it was really bad driving.
And bad driving in reference to snow, was that correct?
Yes.
And so you get to Ms. McCabe's house, and during the drive from your house to Ms. McCabe's house, you're speaking to both Ms. McCabe and Ms. Reed?
Yes.
And with reference, I think you've said a couple times as far as a Bluetooth. So as far as what you're hearing on the other side of the conversation, is it just one person, or are you able to hear sort of everything that's going on in the call?
I could hear everything. It was like a regular phone call in the car.
From where you were, your impression was it was hooked up to the speaker of the car?
Correct.
And when you get to Ms. McCabe's house, or what you were just testifying about as far as the taillight, when is it that you're making those observations?
In Jen's driveway.
And so about how far away from the defendant's car are you the first time that you see or your attention is drawn to this taillight?
I was parked right behind them in the driveway.
And can you describe which part of the vehicle you were looking at as far as which taillight that you're observing this damaged?
The right passenger.
And so from there, as far as Ms. McCabe's driveway, you make these observations. Where is it that you go from there?
Say it again?
Sure. So after you're making those observations and you're overhearing that conversation, or you're having that conversation over the Bluetooth, where did the three of you go?
We went to Meadors, to John's house.
And how was it that each of you sort of got from Ms. McCabe's house to John's house on Meadors?
Jen drove Karen's car, and I followed behind in my car.
And when you arrived there, where did you go? Where did you park? Like,
I pulled in, I think I pulled in right behind. She pulled her car sort of in front of the garage bays, and I pulled in the driveway behind her.
and when you say she, do you know who was driving?
Jen McCabe, sorry.
Driving and Miss Reed's in the front passenger seat.
Correct.
And you're driving your car behind.
Correct.
And what kind of car did you have?
A Ford Explorer.
Do you recall what color it was?
Dark gray.
And as far as Miss Reed, do you recall what kind of vehicle she had at that point?
A Lexus SUV.
Do you recall what color that was?
Black.
Now, with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, do you recall what kind of vehicle John O'Keefe had?
He has a Traverse.
And do you recall what color that was?
It's like a beige green.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could ask to publish what's been marked as exhibit number 2.
Okay.
Ms. Roberts, directing your attention to the screen over here, do you recognize what is up on the screen?
That's John's house.
And does that seem like a fair and accurate portrayal of what John's house looked like at around the time of January 29th when you went over that morning?
Much snowier, but yes.
Sorry, I can't hear you over the coughing if you could repeat.
Oh, I said it was much more snow, but yes.
Now, not visible in this particular photograph, or the driveway that you were talking about, facing Mr. O'Keefe's house at Meadows Ave, as we are in this picture, whereabouts would the driveway be? To the left or the right or something?
To the right.
And, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could ask to publish what's been marked with exhibit 91.
Okay.
And again, Ms. Roberts, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
That is John's car.
And what is it that's behind John's car?
Behind a basketball hoop?
No, I'm sorry. That's correct. Not the rear of the vehicle, but sort of in the photograph behind on the other side of the passenger side of the vehicle.
Oh, the garage doors?
And there are two garage doors, one on the left, one on the right, is that correct? You're familiar with this house, you've been over it a number of times when Mr. O'Keefe lived there?
Correct.
And as far as, what if anything were you familiar with as far as Mr. O'Keefe having regarding sort of security around his house?
Security, he has a Ring camera that was in the driveway and a Ring camera that was at the side door.
And with regard to the garage itself, as far as you've been in there as well?
Yes.
And so what is behind the left door of the garage?
His big old blue convertible.
And on the right side of the garage, what if anything is in behind it?
Nothing. He's got all organized stuff and kids sporting. I don't know if he parked in there or not.
Now, as far as how Mr. O'Keefe kept his garage, kept his home, was there a particular way in which he kept it when he lived there, you know?
Neat freak.
I'm sorry, what was that?
He was a neat freak.
Okay.
And as you enter into this garage, what, if any, access would you then have to inside the home?
There's a set of stairs and it brings you right into like the mudroom, which leads into the kitchen.
Now, when you would go over to Mr. O'Keefe's house on this occasion or any other occasion, what, if any, rules or preferences would Mr. O'Keefe have with regard to footwear?
You did not wear footwear in the house. You took your shoes off.
And is that something that applied to people that lived there as well as people that were visiting?
Yes.
And how would you describe, is that a relatively strict rule?
Yes.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could, I'd like to publish a portion of Exhibit 6, ring video.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have from the driveway, video number 154. I might ask you to just pause after this. So, Ms. Roberts, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, that's Karen's car and my car, and John's is in the background.
Now, in front of you on the desk, there should be a laser point. It's not just. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, pressing on that button and pointing sort of at the screen, if I could ask you just direct the jury's attention to where you see Ms. Reed's vehicle, where you see your vehicle, and where you see Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle, if at all.
That is John's car. That is Karen's car. That is my car.
And is this a fair and accurate portrayal of sort of where the cars were and what things looked like when you first arrived at Mr. O'Keefe's house, coming from Ms. McCabe's house?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if you could. Pause it. Now, with reference to any individuals that you observed in this video, again, using the laser pointer, if you could draw the jury's attention to who you observed and where they were.
That is Jen McCabe, and that is Karen Reed, and that's me.
And at some point, you enter in through the garage, is that right?
Correct.
Now, as far as the garage doors were concerned, when you came back that morning, what, if anything, did you notice about the garage doors?
The right garage door wouldn't close.
So it was open when you arrived?
I don't recall if it was open when we arrived, but when we were leaving, it wouldn't close.
And do you recall, do you have any idea of sort of how that mechanically worked, like how you would open, how you would close the garage door?
Yeah, there's a code on the side.
And at any point in time, whenever you noticed that the garage door was open, were you or any of the people that you were with able to close that door?
No.
And so is that the door that you entered into in order to get into the garage, to get into the mud, and take off your shoes and go in the house?
Correct.
And when you came into the house that morning and you entered into the mud, what, if anything, did you do with your shoes, and what, if anything, did you observe Ms. McCabe and the defendant do with their shoes?
Jen and I both had taken our shoes off in the sort of steps in the garage before we entered into the mudroom. We took our shoes off, and Karen just walked in.
This is really interesting. I always found this super interesting part or compelling part of Carrie Roberts' testimony. Karen Reed, they all take off their shoes except Karen Reed, because Karen Reed knows that John O'Keefe's rules no longer applies. She's removed him from the planet, no longer matters. And it's her middle finger to John O'Keefe to walk in his house the way she wants to. Doesn't matter anymore, your rules. Your rules don't apply. Gives her such a feeling of power. I've removed you from the planet. Doesn't matter. Your rules don't apply in this house anymore. Never mind that I'm sneaking into your house. It's not your house anymore. Your rules don't apply. Everyone knows that. Everyone. The only person that knows that is Karen Reed, because the only person who knows what's happened to John O'Keefe is Karen Reed that day. It's a really key detail of this testimony.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just play the video from that. Now, Ms. Roberts, with reference to
So Karen Reed got John O'Keefe's phone data very early. So I just noting some people in the chat wondering if John O'Keefe had affairs. I think if he had affairs that came out in his text messages and phone data, that would have been exploited by the defense early on. The only one who seemed to be having flirtations and that we've heard about is Karen Reed.
Ring video security system that Mr. O'Keefe had at his home. If you know, do you know who had access to that?
I do not.
Obviously, do you know whether or not Mr. O'Keefe had access to that?
He did, yes.
Okay, do you know how or what device he used in order to access it?
I only know he had it on his phone.
How do you know he had it on his phone?
Because he would check it all the time to see if the kids were home or dropped off or...
That's something he did in your presence?
Yes.
Now, with regard to, at some point when you get to the home, beyond the sort of initial observations you made in Ms. McCabe's driveway with regard to the right rear passenger taillight of Ms. Reed's vehicle, what, if any, other observations did you make, or what, if anything else, did you do with reference to that area of the vehicle?
Karen did point it out at one point in the driveway. She said, my taillight, look at my taillight. And I looked at it and I said, you told me you don't remember anything from last night. She said, do you think I hit him? Do you think I hit him? And I said, no, I don't think you hit him. I think you probably hit something, but let's just go in the house and look for him.
And so as far as your recollection is concerned, that sort of interaction that you had of looking at the taillight window?
Do you think I hit him? I'm telling you what happened through my the way that before she started saying I hit him. Did I hit him? I could have hit him. Got hit by something. Got hit by a plow. No, it was Carrie Roberts who said I hit him. I didn't say I hit him.
When did that happen?
I don't know if it was when, well, it obviously wasn't when we got there. It was what must have been when we were leaving to go out to look for him.
When you what? I'm sorry.
I wasn't sure if it was when we arrived or when we were leaving to go back out and look for him, but now that I've seen the video, it's obviously when we came back out of the house.
Okay.
And who was present for that?
Who was present?
Yes.
Jen McCabe, Karen Reed, and myself.
And as far as where Ms. McCabe parked that vehicle, at any point in time that you were at the house, did that vehicle move at all? And by that vehicle, I mean Ms. Reed's vehicle.
I don't think so.
So where it's parked in that video is essentially where it stayed as far as you know.
I believe so.
Now, With reference to those observations or when you were looking at the rear passenger taillight area of Ms. Reed's vehicle, how close to the vehicle were you when you were making those observations?
Right in front of it. There was one piece, like a rectangle encapsulated, like whatever was broken. I remember there was one piece of metal sort of sticking out. So if it was an encasement for a light of some sort, I remember looking at it and the piece was sort of sticking out and I thought someone's going to catch their sleeve on that or something.
Now from there, when you arrive at the house, you go into the house, you take off your shoes, what happened then?
I started looking, Jen started looking, Karen, her and Jen went upstairs. I started looking downstairs. I started looking on the other side of the couches to see if maybe he passed out somewhere. And then I went upstairs and Karen was standing in John's room. The bed was made. She was just standing there. Jen had gone in to talk to Kaylee. And then I said, all right, let's go. He's not in the house. He's not in the house.
As far as your knowledge of Mr. O'Keefe.
Okay, that's a good place for just a break. Let's look at your comments really quickly. Some interesting, thought-provoking comments from you guys.
We got your comments. You had something to say. You were insightful. Oh, so clever. So Roberta's going to read your comments. Hey, Roberta, read those comments.
Laura Valhos says she wanted to control, meaning Karen Reed wanted to control John. Karen Reed called John 53 times after she ran him over. She was bizarre, controlling, couldn't take no for an answer, couldn't be left. She was going to have the last word. The last word was her clipping John 24 miles an hour in reverse, her foot 75% on the gas pedal. Never once touching the brake with her infotainment system beeping and flashing at her. Dougie Morrison says all of her groupies are so starstruck or so influenced by a very well-organized, well-funded innocence fraud campaign. The more evidence I hear, I see why the jury was so split, not in her favor, mind you, but that reasonable doubt did not supersede all of the sickening evidence against her. I do not believe she can fool them twice. Well, from your keyboard to God's ears, let's hope that she gets convicted, and not just convicted of something. I hope the Commonwealth is able to prove the second-degree murder charge against her. Let's hope so, because I think this was a premeditated murder. I don't think this was like some kind of, I think it was brought on by real rage, but I think she'd been thinking about doing this. And I hope we hear about some, if there is evidence, and there have been rumors about her violent past towards boyfriends, I'd like to hear it. The only proof that we've been able to find is her yelling at a neighbor about a dog. But there have been rumors of her setting her boyfriend's car on fire, pulling a knife. Those are things I've heard. I don't know if they're true. They're just rumors. Let's see what Hank Brennan pulls out second trial. And if it's accepted into evidence. You know, you only see a portion of the story in these trials. The jury only hears a portion of the story. So what's accepted into evidence? Also, it's the narrative that the lawyers put on the case. And I'm not buying this alcohol-fueled rage. I just don't think that alcohol touched the sides. It may have loosened her inhibitions, but I think she had been planning this. That's where I'm at with it. Thinking about it, fantasizing about it. I don't know, planning is a good word. Fantasizing about it. Just the way Karen Reed doesn't do nothing. Nothing is done by accident with Karen Reed. Marin Kell Moon says, so strange how similar Sarah Boone and Karen Reed are, hating their victim's family almost obsessively. Because, of course, they have the most knowledge. Paul O'Keefe, John's mother. They have the most knowledge. John O'Keefe's mother never liked Karen Reed. And had a feeling almost immediately that it was Karen Reed. They don't want to see her rising from the ashes. That's Karen Reed's quote. They just want justice. These two criminal women don't relate to the family simply grieving. They don't relate. They want to re-victimize the family. They get pleasure out of torturing the family. Reminds me of Amanda Knox, too. And they like to turn the tables and make the family the real victimizers and themselves the victim. Something Karen Reed did. Just let me see if I still have that crazy quote from Karen Reed on the O'Keefes. The O'Keefes, this is what Karen Reed told Vanity Fair. The O'Keefes never carried a pitchfork for me until I started getting support. You didn't speak to any media. Now you're giving interviews. You really just can't stand my rising from the ashes. The only thing that changed is I started to come from a position of power. Right. So how dare they steal her spotlight? She's the only one. And of course she doesn't want them talking. And that's why the campaign is so feral and so aggressive, to scare anyone out of talking to the media or out of and not supporting Karen Reed or supporting the other side and talking about Karen Reed's guilt. That's why they absolutely have the most vicious innocence fraud campaign. Go scour Facebook the way Karen Reed does. Find all the details about their lives. Write blogs, expose them, expose any embarrassing details about them, exploit their weaknesses. That's the way that this innocence fraud campaign is run. Exploit the weaknesses of anyone or vulnerabilities of anyone that says Karen Reed is guilty. It's not that they can't stand her power. It's that they can't stand that she took the life of their son or brother. How wrong of them to have a little problem with their herder. How unchristianly. They should just love her for it, right? Shouldn't they? Love her for it and support her innocence fraud campaign. All right, back to Carrie Roberts.
Him not coming home when any of the children were home, was that something that was normal?
Him not coming home if the children were home?
Correct.
Yeah, he would not do that.
And obviously you knew Kaylee was there, but what, if anything, did you know as to where Patrick was at that point?
He was at a friend's house.
And was that something that you knew in the...
D says, Roberta, why do you think she was fantasizing about it? Well, things were bad in their relationship. She wouldn't leave their home when asked. She was extremely angry that she wasn't getting her way. And John O'Keefe wasn't as easily as manipulated. And it was the end of the relationship. How dare he break up with her? She leaves. She decides who leaves. And I think she started fantasizing about it when things started getting bad between them. And it's the perfect way for Karen Reed to do a crime like this, where she has plausible deniability that it was an accident. She didn't mean to do it. She didn't see him. The music was so loud. The wind was so howling. And she worked very hard to think she follows true crime, knew about innocence fraud, and is very well versed in it. Got an innocence fraud campaign for herself that she's done very well off of. She's got 3 lawyers now. Is that right? Yeah, 3 lawyers. And a huge host of people that are making real bank off of this, including herself. They've raised, hundreds of thousands of dollars for her. I don't believe that she's, whatever she says, $3 million in debt. I don't believe that. She doesn't look like she's suffering. She's hosting parties for people to come and have dinner. That can't be cheap.
Independent of this morning or what had transpired up to that point?
Say that again?
How did you find out that Patrick was at a friend's house sleeping over?
Karen said, I said, where's Patrick? She said he's at his friend's.
So you were in the downstairs area of the home, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. 5 lawyers. 5 lawyers. Thanks, Jude. She has Elizabeth Little, Alan Jackson, David Unetti, the new one who I can see, and I can't remember his name right now. Help me out. I can see him in my mind, who cross-examined. And is there one I'm missing? Who's the 5th? Help me out.
And looking through the rooms, you didn't find Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
No.
Now, at any point in time, did you go upstairs?
I did.
And when you went upstairs, where in the upstairs did you go?
At the top of the stairs is John's bedroom, so I looked in there. I looked in the bathroom. I looked in the closet. I looked in Patrick's room. I looked in the other 2 bedrooms, and Kaylee was in her room. So Jen was in there, but I was looking through the house.
And as far as Mr. O'Keefe's bedroom, when you looked in there, what, if anything, did you observe as far as the condition of the bed?
The bed was made.
You mentioned you looked in a variety of different rooms on the 2nd floor. You said sort of 2 other rooms. What?
Robert Alessi, of course. Of course. How could I forget his name? And there's one more. There's one more, though we haven't seen him recently. Is it Weinstein? Okay.
If anything, were those other rooms used for, if you know?
I think one of them was a computer room. It was the room that faced the front of the house, and the back room had a bed in it that Mrs. O'Keefe would stay in when she would stay over.
And again, just to be clear, when you say Mrs. O'Keefe, you mean John's mother?
John's mother, sorry.
And as far as the computer room, who, if anyone, had access to that, if you know?
Had access to the computer room?
Yes. What was it used for? Basically?
Oh, there was a desk with a computer or laptop.
And did you know whose laptop that was, whether it was John's, whether it was the defendant's, whether it was the kids?
I don't know if it was the defendant's at the time, but John's laptop used to be in that room.
Your Honor, with the court's permission,
Correction, Karen Reed says she's $5 million in debt. I'm not believing that. I mean, you just don't. I just don't believe that. I think that's made up for sympathy.
Would ask if I could publish just a couple more photos on the screen for Ms. Roberts.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if I could start with Exhibit 92. Ms. Roberts, directing your attention up to the screen, do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
That's Karen Reed's Lexus.
And specifically, if you could, using the laser pointer in front of you, direct the jury's attention to where you observed damage that way.
That's where the metal piece I was describing was.
As far as what's depicted in this photograph up on the screen, is that consistent with what you observed in Mr. O'Keefe's driveway and Ms. McCabe's driveway when you saw it that morning?
Well, caked in snow, but yes.
So absent the snow.
That's her cracked taillight. Does that look cracked or smashed? Smashed to pieces. But Karen Reed supporters will say that that is just cracked.
Yes.
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next exhibit number 93. Again, Ms. Roberts, do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes.
Essentially a closer-up image of the same area, correct?
Yes.
And what's depicted in this closer-up image, is that also consistent with what you observed in Ms. McCabe's driveway and Mr. O'Keefe's driveway that morning?
Yes.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask again if I could publish a portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 41.
Okay.
Ms. Roberts, directing your attention up to the screen, do you recognize what's on the pause portion of the screen from this video?
That's John's house.
And Ms. Kimberly, if you could press play again. Ms. Kimberly, if you could pause it. And again, Ms. Roberts, directing your attention up to the screen, do you recognize what's sort of in front of the camera in this particular portion of the video?
That's Karen's car and John's car.
And where you observe Karen's car and John's car, again, if you could just, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to where you observe each of those in this still frame here.
That's Karen's car. That's John's car.
And are those essentially the same positions that you were talking about that the jury saw earlier in the ring video from Mr. O'Keefe's house?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Ms. Roberts, I'm going to show you just two photographs. Ask you to just look at those and look finish.
Okay.
And do you recognize those? Or do you recognize what's depicted in them?
Do I recognize what?
What's depicted in each of those photographs?
Karen's car.
Okay. And may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I will proceed to introduce and admit as the next two exhibits.
Okay, is there any objection?
No objection.
All right, thank you.
And Ms. Roberts, what's up on the screen now is Exhibit 101. You indicated that's Ms. Reed's vehicle in the same position where Ms. McCabe left the car from the property, correct?
Yes.
Does this appear to be a still shot from the same video that you just saw in the prior exhibit?
Yes.
And Ms. Roberts, what's up on the screen, that's the second photograph that I showed you just a moment ago.
Yes.
And that's essentially a closer up or zoomed in image of what's in the same still image that you saw in the prior exhibit, correct?
Yes.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer, just direct the jury's attention to the damage that you observed on the right rear passenger taillight of Ms. Reed's vehicle that morning. Okay. You can take it. Now, you go, look through the home, you don't find Mr. O'Keefe, and what happens there?
Then I said, let's go look for him. If he might be walking home, or if you thought he got hit by a plow, let's just, and Jen and Karen wanted to go back to 34 Fairview where they were at. Jen said she saw her pull up to 34 Fairview the night before. So Karen really wanted to go back there. I was the one that said, no, let's drop a car off, go to Meadows and look through the house, and then we'll start looking if he's not in the house. So that's what we did. We got in the car and we were going to head back to Jen's sister's house.
And so this conversation, as far as the defendant, as you're testifying, really wanting to go to Fairview, when did that occur in relation to when you got to Mr. O'Keefe's?
On the way from Jen McCabe's house to John's house in the car.
So this is over the Bluetooth as you're driving?
Yes, Karen said I left him at Waterfall, and Jen said, no, I saw you pull up in front of my sister's.
And so after coming out of Mr. O'Keefe's house, do you exit the same way that you entered?
Yes,
Come out the garage door, get into your car?
yes.
And if you could describe to the jury sort of where was everybody seated in your car when you get it?
I was driving, Karen was in the back seat, and Jen was in the passenger seat.
And as far as Ms. McCabe's sister's house, at the time, did you know where that was or who her sister was or anything like that?
I didn't even know she had a sister.
And you know about how long a drive or how far a drive or what the route was that you took going from Meadows to her sister's house?
I think we went main roads because we were looking to see, I mean, I don't know what we were looking for, but we were looking for him. I don't know if we thought he was walking home or if he got hit by a plow. So we went main roads. We pulled out, I think we went Bolivar Street, and then Jen was giving directions because I didn't know where we were going.
And to be clear, Bolivar Street, you're talking about, that's Bolivar?
Yes,
And so then Ms. McCabe is then giving you directions as you're driving, correct?
correct.
Now, as you're driving, again, as far as what, if anything, did you see as far as plows or how were the roads treated at that time? What, if anything, did you observe in reference to that?
It was bad driving. There were plows out, but it was really bad driving.
And the visibility as you were driving from Mr. O'Keefe's house to Ms. McCabe's sister's house, how would you describe the visibility?
It was very poor. It was in the middle of a blizzard.
Now, when you get to the street, at some point you're directed by Ms. McCabe to Fairview Road, correct?
Correct.
And when you get to Fairview Road, do you recall whether or not you took a left or a right, or how did you come onto Fairview Road?
Off of Chapman Street, I took a right onto Fairview.
You took a right from Chapman onto Fairview.
Correct.
And as you're coming down Fairview Road, what, if anything, did you note or observe as far as the sort of elevation of the roadway?
You go downhill.
Do you go down a hill?
Yes.
This particular area of Canton, obviously you've lived in Canton for several years. Are you somewhat familiar with this area of Canton?
Yeah.
And how is it that you were familiar with the area of Canton prior to this date if you've never been to Ms. McCabe's sister's house?
The commuter rail is right near there that I would take to work.
Are there any schools in that area as well?
Yes, the John F. Kennedy School.
And you mentioned that your son played baseball, correct?
Yes, and my son and John's nephew also went to the home daycare across the street from the JFK.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to just publish a brief portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 12.
Okay.
Ms. Roberts, from what you've seen on the video, as far as what's depicted in this video, is that a fair and accurate portrayal or consistent with what you observed that morning as you were driving around going from Mr. O'Keefe's house to Ms. McCabe's sister's house?
Yes.
And the turn that this vehicle is taking at this point in the video, about 2 minutes and 40 seconds in, do you recognize what street that vehicle is turning onto?
I believe it's Fairview.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could. Now, Ms. Roberts, as you're driving from Mr. O'Keefe's house to this address on Fairview Road that you've never been to before, what's going on inside the car?
Karen was frantic. She wouldn't put her seatbelt on, and I was getting nervous because we're driving in a blizzard. She kept leaning in between the two seats. I think at some point she was texting in the back seat, and then she'd be leaning. She was just frantic the whole morning.
And as far as her screaming, do you recall anything specifically that she was screaming, or what, if any, sort of conversation was going on in the car as you were driving?
There was some conversation about a woman I didn't know that was Bella's mom, and she said Bella's mom never liked me. I think Bella lived near Jen's sister, maybe. I don't know. Some conversation about Bella's mom, and Karen said she didn't like me.
And do you recall where you were in your travels when that topic of conversation came up?
No, I don't recall.
Now, in reference to following that, what, if anything, did you say in regard to any other sort of women?
Any other what?
Following that conversation in regard to Bella's mom, who you didn't know, what, if anything, did you say or introduce into the conversation?
Fairview Road runs along Spring Street, I think it is. Spring Lane. So Spring Lane and Fairview are both off at Chapman Street, and there was a woman he dated that lived on Spring Lane. So when Jen was telling me where her sister's house was, I said, I don't know where Fairview is. And she said, it's near Spring Lane. And I said, oh, where the dance instructor lived. John had once dated a dance instructor. And then Karen said, do you think he could have gone there? Do you think that's where he could have been? No, I was just using it as a reference point. She said it's near Spring Lane. And I knew that the dance instructor lived on Spring Lane.
And just to be clear, when you say the dance instructor, this would be for his niece, Kaylee?
Correct.
And you indicated that the two of them, being Mr. O'Keefe and the dance instructor, had dated at some point in the past, correct?
Yes.
How long ago was that?
Oh, it was when Kaylee was little. She was probably like 5.
So almost 10 years before this date that you're driving away. Now, as you're driving along and driving down Fairview, what is it that you're doing? What, if anything, do you observe Mr. McCabe doing? And then what, if anything, do you observe the defendant?
Well, we were looking for John walking or wherever he may be. So I'm driving and looking on both sides, and I think Jen was looking on both sides. And Karen she would be in the back seat, then she'd be in between us, then she'd be in the back seat, and then in between us.
And as you came down the hill on Fairview, what, if anything, what happened then?
Jen said, my sister's house is right up here. And all of a sudden, Karen said, there he is, there he is. Let me the F out of this car. And she started kicking the door.
And how was she kicking the door?
With her feet. Well, how was she kicking the door?
How hard was she kicking?
Oh, pretty hard. I mean, she wanted to get out of the car, but it was locked because once you start driving, the back doors lock. So I looked over and I didn't see anything. And I looked at Jen and I said, she's crazy. And I unlocked the door and I sat back and watched.
She's not crazy. She's strategically getting ready, feigning hysteria for her big performance. The finding of John O'Keefe. And that's why I think she picked Carrie. So she said, oh, she was crazy. She was out of her mind. She was so overwhelmed with shock and grief. She didn't know what she had done. But she didn't look anywhere in the house for John O'Keefe. And boy, didn't take off her shoes. She knew that the shoe rule was no longer relevant, applicable.
And she ran over to a mound of snow.
And so as the time you're driving down the road, have you seen anything, as you're driving down, sort of looking at the side of the road, have you seen anything on your side of the vehicle?
No.
And when you say she gets out of the vehicle, is it your side or passenger side where Ms. McCabe is? That
The driver's side.
So she gets out of the driver's side of the vehicle and the back passenger, correct?
Correct.
And how quickly does she go sort of from your car to where she ends up?
She ran over to the mound.
And at that point in time, even when she runs over, could you see what she was running over to?
At some point, I realized it was the shape of a body.
And when was that?
No one else sees him but Karen Reed. Psychic Karen Reed knows that the shoe rule is no one's going to yell at her anymore for wearing her shoes in John O'Keefe's house, except Karen Reed. Everyone else takes their shoes off. Karen Reed knows it's no longer applicable because he's dead, thanks to her. No one else sees John O'Keefe in the snow, but Karen Reed knows right where to find him. Everyone else says, let's look at especially Carrie Roberts at 34 Meadows, Meadows first, excuse me. John O'Keefe's home first before going to 34 Fairview. But Karen Reed has never looked for him. She knows that's not where he is. What she did was she gathered two people to be witnesses to her finding John O'Keefe and being hysterical. And these were the two that she felt that she could convince that she was out of her mind with grief and shock and horror at what she discovered.
That you realized, when in this sort of sequence were you able to realize that?
That was in seconds. Once she ran over to his body, I said, oh my God. And she lifted up his shirt and started to lay on him.
And when you stopped to let her out, where were you in relation to that mound of snow or what you learned?
I think my car was like in the middle of the road. I just stopped.
And in relation to where the mound of snow was, had you driven past it at that point? So where was it?
Yes.
Okay, so it was located behind your vehicle?
Yeah.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, I would ask just press play on that for about 6 minutes and 30 seconds. What's depicted in the screen in front of this camera angle? Do you recognize what that is?
That's my car.
And is that essentially where you parked your car when Miss Reed started kicking the doors and got out and ran over?
Yes.
You could just press play for a moment. Pause it. Now, from this video, do you see where in relation to your vehicle, Mr. O'Keefe, where you found Mr. O'Keefe?
With the pointer?
Well, we don't, it's so obvious. There was no snow. That's what Karen Reed supporters say. There was no snow. So obvious. Anyone could have seen him. Only Karen Reed was looking. Come on. Really? I mean, look at the site conditions. It's pitch dark, pitch black dark. Horrible vision conditions. I mean, it's hard to even tell what we're looking at here. We've never seen this kind of emotion from Karen Reed. The happiest murder defendant, right? Laughing, rolling her eyes. We've all never seen any tears, never sadness. None of this remorse that I hear about on both sides of the aisle. I've seen zero remorse.
Huh?
And now begins the Karen Reed show. I mean, let's think about what she did. She never gave him mouth to mouth. She never cleared his airways. She straddled him, lifted up her shirt, and grinded on him. To quote unquote keep him warm, get him warm. I mean, this was all her feigned hysteria. I mean, to my eye, it looks comical and ridiculous if it weren't so sad. Karen Reed prancing around on the balls of her feet, yelling. She knows what she's done. Could I have hit him? Yes, you did. I hit him. I hit him. I did this. Look at the taillight. She knows right where he is, right what she did. But another time she's going to say she's so drunk she didn't remember what she did. She remembers everything. I mean, I just don't believe this blackout, drunk, didn't know what she did story. Sorry, guys. No. All right, we're just gonna watch a little of this. I think I'm gonna wind it down pretty soon.
Visuals on screen again. But just using the laser pointer and direct your attention to those are.
That is Jen McCabe. That's Karen Reed. That's me.
Roberts.
And they all seem to know he was past help. They all seem to know that he was deceased. But Karen Reed was sure of it in a way that what you know in common sense. I was just reading about Jackie O and JFK and his assassination, and how Jackie O was was trying to piece her husband back together in the car. I mean, that's what you do. You try to hold on to life, or the idea that someone that even well beyond what your rational mind is telling you. But not Karen Reed. Karen Reed was sure that it was over, hit by a plow, gone, dead. Only Karen Reed was absolutely sure and knew exactly where to find him. So that's what I have for today, guys. I mean, this is not talked about. What we're getting on both sides of the fence is some sort of version of the Karen Reed didn't know what she was doing. Alcohol did it, not Karen. She's overcharged. It's a manslaughter case. There's no intent to harm, no premeditation. And that's not where I'm at on this case. Let me know where you're at on the comments. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this episode, support me on Patreon and get access to exclusive content, or support the show by buying me a coffee or sending a donation via Venmo. The links are in the description of this episode. Have a great night, everybody. I'm going to go out the way I always do with my hit single, I Hit My Boyfriend with My Car, song about Karen Reed.
I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident, but with lying lawyers I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment, I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system a clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim. Carrie, Jen, like John, you were my mom. My innocence fraud campaign is my biggest hit yet. I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident, but with lying lawyers I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment, I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system a clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second